Okay, welcome everybody. This is the first ever event of the new joint research seminar of the Center for Philosophical Studies of History and the Center for the Philosophy of Historiography. The new seminar's name is PHO2, the Ostrava Olu Research Seminar in the Philosophy of History. My name is Georg Gangi and I will be today's moderator. More importantly, today's esteemed speaker will be Ádám Takács with the topic The Historical Present as a Philosophical Problem. Ádám is currently assistant professor at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, Hungary. I hope I pronounced it somewhat correctly, along with his surname. Ádám's main research interests lie in European modern intellectual history, Eastern European state socialisms, and continental philosophy in general, and especially phenomenology. Ádám published widely in English, French, and Hungarian. Of his many publications, I only want to mention two here, which have a bearing on the philosophy of history. One is the book Foucault's Critical Philosophy of History, which came out in 2023 with Lexington Books. And another one is the article Unbalanced Exposure, Existentialism, Marxism, and Philosophical Culture in State Socialist Hungary, which appeared in the same year in the journal Studies in East European Thought. Now, after today, we will still have four more events in our new research seminar, PHO2, until June. First of all, today in 2 weeks, on March 27, Gunnar Schumann from the University of Hagen in Germany will be speaking about on historical explanation and anti-causalist approach. Thereafter, on April 17, we have Jamie Elders from Tufts University in the US, who will be talking about astronomy, cosmology in the distant past. Then on May 29, Arthur Alfaiz Assis, who I think I've seen among the participants today already, from the University of Brasilia, will be speaking about Koselleck and the concept of history. And finally, on June 17, Gregory Redick from Leeds University in the UK will be speaking about From Cleopatra's Nose to Darwin's Nose, J.B. Bury on history, science, and contingency. Now, all these talks will take place on Zoom, just like this one, in the same kind of setting. But the last will also be hybrid, so it will happen in Ostrava and on Zoom, so you can come to either place if you would like to join. And more information about every event will be published roughly 2 weeks ahead of them on our social media channels and homepages. So if you want to stay updated about our activities, please consider following our social media accounts. Both centers have now Blue Sky, and the Center for Philosophical Studies of History also has Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. And there are many more joint and non-joint events planned. Just to give you one example, on April 24, the Center for the Philosophy of Historiography will host a workshop on pragmatist philosophy of history, which will also soon be published more information about. So, okay, I have been speaking already enough, but just very end technicalities. Please mute yourself during Ádám's talk to avoid any unnecessary disturbance. And after the talk, which should take about 45 minutes, there will be a discussion session that I will moderate. In the discussion session, if you have a comment or a question, please first indicate so in the chat. I will make a speakers list. When it's your turn, you can can either speak up with or without your camera on, or write your question in the chat, and I will read it out loud. And we will prioritize people who haven't spoken yet, so they will move up on the speakers list. Okay, that was it for my longish introduction. Thank you, everybody, and thank you especially, Ádám, for being here. The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Georg, for this kind introduction, and thank you first of all for inviting me for this session and for opening up the whole 25 spring series of talks at your center. I'm really feel privileged, and I'm very happy to be here. So let me share my screen, and then I can just start my talk. All right, everybody can see? Yes, okay. So let me just say as a way of intro that the topic I'm going to talk about here is a full-fledged work in progress. So I'm extremely happy to be able to talk about this in this framework, because I'm expecting feedbacks from you, and please do not hesitate to share your views, your ideas, your opinions, and critiques with me, because I think it will productively contribute to the way I'm going to develop this project. Now, as you could see, my major issue, my major topic of talk is the historical present as a philosophical problem. And in this very talk, I'm trying to kind of elaborate and work out a genealogical approach to the question, to the issue at stake. And hopefully by the end of my conclusion, you will have a clear picture about the historical kind of milestones I'm trying to analyze, and also the stake of this whole question and the importance of this topic. Now, let me just start by simply pointing out that there has been quite a few research, reflection, analysis on the question of present time and the notion of contemporaneity recently. I mean, one can hardly name a contemporary continental philosopher who has not addressed this question in one way or another in the past 2-3 decades or so. Major names that appear on the list of analyzing the historical present time and the problem of contemporaneity includes Giorgio Agamben, Paul Ricoeur, Frederick Jameson, who wrote a whole book, subtitles The Ontology of the Present, Alain Badiou, Antonio Negri, Slavoj Žižek, but you could also add a bunch of French thinkers and theorists such as Vincent Decombe or François Hartog, who analyze this question from various angles and various perspectives. Now, what I would like to add to this already rich kind of panorama of thinkers is that we do have a kind of paradigmatic way of addressing the question of the present from a philosophical, properly philosophical and historical point of view. And that would be Michel Foucault's project that you may know, I guess, especially in his late undertaking that was labeled by Foucault as the historical ontology of the present, or the historical ontology of ourselves. You know, these notions and these approaches are widely developed in Foucault's various texts on Kant's essay, or written about Kant's essay of What is Enlightenment, and this is the text and the lectures that Foucault elaborated his idea of the historical ontology of the present, and basically argued that his entire work, his various historical investigations targeting notions of knowledge, notions of structures of power, or figures of subjectivity, could be basically defined as revolving around the notion of the present and the historical ontology of the present. Now, it is maybe less known that this whole question of the present, of the today, of actuality, of the ontology of the present time is already widely present in the early Foucault, where Foucault, instead of talking about the historical ontology of the present, talks about the diagnosis of the present as a philosophical problem. And some of these texts just has been made available recently. For example, the course of Foucault entitled The Discourse of the Philosophical Discourse, Le Discours Philosophique, which has been published last year. It's an entire course, university course, that Foucault gave in 1967 in Tunis, in university in Tunis, in Tunisia, which is basically the main topic of the talk is the diagnosis of the present as a philosophical project, and the diagnosis of the present as a philosophical project that Foucault wants to elaborate in his writings. So there's a clear link about the notion of the present and the notion of Foucault already in the early texts. I brought here a quotation from a famous interview in the same year, 1967. It is the famous interview which contains Foucault's quarrel with Jean-Paul Sartre, and when Foucault maliciously claims that Sartre was supposed to be a 19th century man trying to understand 20th century. And in this very interview, Foucault also says about his relation to the philosophy. And as you will see, this is precisely the diagnostic attitude I was talking about. Let me go. Sorry?
People say they cannot see the slides moving. Have you moved them already?
I have, yes.
Oh yeah, no, we all only see the beginning slide.
Yeah, I believe that not the correct window is being shared with us.
Oh really? I'm very sorry. It's all moving for me. So
yeah.
Now we see it. It's not in full screen mode, but we see it. Now we see the second slide.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it sometimes happens that when you share the screen, you can choose between the PowerPoint itself and the presentation. So,
Okay, how about now? Can you see
It's
it now?
still, yes, but are you on slide two?
Is it moving now?
No, it's not moving. I think you
it's
have to move it by hand, maybe.
yeah.
So what am I supposed to do? Because
Uh,
it's all works for me perfectly. So
Yeah,
what?
so start the presentation, Alt tab to zoom, and when you share the screen, it should give you the selection of screens to share, and
Yeah,
you need to choose the one with the presentation, not the one with the PowerPoint interface.
sorry. So I need to choose the.
I think that PowerPoint there should be two different options with PowerPoint. One with the presentation itself, and the second one with the PowerPoint interface. And you should select the one with the presentation. But the presentation must be started first.
Oh boy, I'm a little bit lost now. Let me
Or,
just restart.
or you can just share. Uh,
Okay, how about now?
it looks like before, but maybe you just do it by hand. So if you click now on slide two, for instance, on the side,
yeah, we can
yes,
work
now
with this.
now we see it. So whenever you change slide, you have to click like this. That would work for us. Is that
Okay, but
doable?
can I enlarge it? Do I have to enlarge it, or you can see it right here?
Well, because now we see the whole PowerPoint window. If you enlarge it, we probably only see the presentation, but I'm not sure if it works then. But it works like this. If it's okay with you, we can just continue like this.
So no, you can't see it.
No, we can see it now. Now we're on slide two, but you will have to change by hand on the left-hand side there from two
Oh,
to
I
three
see.
and so
Okay,
forth.
all right.
That will work if that works for you too.
Yeah. So I can just
Okay.
leave it right here.
Yes, but if
Okay, and then
before
I
you,
move it. Okay,
when you
I
go to
understand.
the next slide, just make sure that you let us know and we'll see if it works like
Yeah,
that way.
yeah.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for the disturbance.
All right. No. Yeah, it's obviously it makes sense. And then okay, so now you can see my second slide, right? Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yes,
So
yes, yes.
so here are the contemporary thinkers I'm talking about. Here is the history ontology present. Here's the diagnosis of Foucault, and then here is the quotation that I wanted to share with you guys. Namely, when Foucault says that, and I quote, "It is very possible that my work has something to do with philosophy. Above all, insofar as, at least since Nietzsche, the task of philosophy has been to make diagnosis, and its aim is no longer to proclaim a truth which would be valid for all and for all time. I seek to diagnose, to carry out the diagnosis of the present, to stay what we are today and what it means today that we say what we say. This work of excavation beneath our feet has characterized contemporary thought since Nietzsche. And in this sense, I can declare myself a philosopher." So it's very clear, I think, from this quotation what Foucault wants to say. And indeed, as Georg kindly introduced me with my book on Foucault's critical philosophy of history, and I take the liberty to flesh out the cover of this book, because I try to understand and try to analyze thoroughly Foucault's philosophy from the beginning to the end, as along these lines, as a diagnostician of the present, as an ontologist of the present time. Now, in my current research and in my current talk that I'm giving right now, I'm not interested in Foucault anymore, but I'm interested in this comment of Foucault, which is in the last phrase of his quotation here, meaning that the work of the excavation beneath our feet has characterized contemporary thought since Nietzsche. So this is the genealogical line that I would like to follow in this talk and argue that Foucault is very right of pointing out that there is something like an extremely interesting invention of the present time as a philosophical problem since Nietzsche or even before him. But Foucault never carried out a systematic genealogical analysis. He mentioned sometimes Kant, he mentioned Nietzsche, he mentions other, but never did a systematic works on this. And I would argue that this tradition of excavation beneath our feet, which is the present, is a much richer and much more kind of interesting history that Foucault may have assumed. And I would like to flesh out some chapters of the story and then try to kind of draw some kind of conclusion. So this is basically the topic of my talk today. And as you will see, I will talk about Zimmel, Croce, Spengler, Lukács, Heidegger, and some others in order to prove the thesis that the discovery of the invention of the present times of philosophical problem has really been a major philosophical novelty and a major philosophical issue for at least a century. No, I changed the slides. It's visible. Okay,
yes,
I hope.
Yes, very good.
Cool. So before we go any further, I would like to make a distinction of which I find I would accord crucial importance, namely a distinction between present age and present time. And I guess, as you know, the notion of the present age or the present epoch or the present era is, as a philosophical concern, a theoretical concern, is rather has a long durée history. So this whole problematic probably dates back to the Renaissance or even earlier. And it was a major issue during the Enlightenment period, not only in France, but also in Great Britain and in Germany. And it was also a major topic in German idealism and the entire idealist tradition that grown out from German idealism, dealing with the present age, dealing with the modern time, as opposed to the past world, as opposed to the ancient world, which is the French called the querelle entre les modernes et les anciens, the quarrel between the moderns and the ancients, is a major historiographical and philosophical issue that developed and evolved through centuries. No, I think that by contrast, the philosophical topos and concern for understanding the present time as opposed to the present age is essentially of a product of the second half of the 19th century. Philosophers were focusing on the present as a time period, as a phase, rather than as an element of an age or an epoch. And that changed the whole kind of vocabulary and scenery of the philosophical problematic that were at stake. In order to illustrate this point, let me just make a kind of quick comparison between Fichte's well-known lecture course or book called The Characteristic of the Present Age that came out in 1806, and Marx's famous The 18th of Louis Napoleon, which has been written by Marx by 1851. So roughly half century separates the two texts, but it seems to me that it is a whole universe, a philosophical universe that separates the two philosophical concerns. Fichte dealing with the present age, Marx, I would argue, dealing with the present time. And as I guess you know, the Fichte's text is a famous one. It's very clear that what Fichte wants to do in this text is to understand the modern time and the history as segmented by various epochs from a philosophical point of view. And he argues that in order to do that, one needs to do a priori deduction of history from one single principle. And Fichte also argues that in order to explore the notion of an age, of a historical age as such, and within this, the historical of the contemporary age, one doesn't need to appeal to any kind of experience. The deduction must be strictly philosophical, a priori, without any kind of appeal to experimental givens. And this is how a philosopher should work on history. This is how a transcendental philosopher, should understand history and should understand on the notion of epoch, including the contemporary epoch. And this is a purely and genuinely philosophical.
Hello? Can you guys hear Adam?
So
Oh, yes, okay, you're back. You're back. Sorry, you were shortly gone.
So many problems. I don't know. what is going on. I'm very sorry.
Maybe you can wind back half a minute or a minute and start there again. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very sorry about this. So many troubles. Anyway, so Fichte argues that understanding the ages and the epochs, the series of ages and epochs that characterize human history, is a transcendental deduction in a Kantian way, meaning you need to deduce from a priori principles the elements of history, and this should be done without any regard to actual and concrete experiences of those subjects who were the proper subject of these historical developments. And then in the second lecture, Fichte also argues that if one wants to check out if there's any correspondence between this a priori deduction and real human experiences, then it can be done, but this is not a philosopher's task. He says, checking out whether what I'm saying is correct with regards to history and comparing it to actual experience of people, it's not a philosopher's task. Everybody has to do it on their own and check out if Fichte was right, if his diagnosis of the time. But this should be done grounded on each of our experiences, life experiences, and this is not a philosopher's task anymore. I can also just add, in case you don't know this text, this lecture by details, that Fichte characterized the present age as the third stage of the history of human development. So it's sort of in a middle way between the beginning and the end, and of which the label would be the epoch of complete sinfulness, which in Fichte terms means that we already liberated ourselves from the feudal authorities, and we're living in the enlightened age, but we still don't know what is the major purpose of the use of our reason. Therefore, we are living in the epoch of the complete sinfulness. We make mistakes all the time, and we don't know yet how can we liberate ourselves, not simply de facto, but also de jure by the use of reason. Now, if we compare this whole set of argumentation and diagnosis with Marx's text on as written in the 18 Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, you will find the entire different scenario. Marx focuses on the contemporary situation, on the present time, instead of the present age. And he argues that in order to understand the present time as a situation and as a phase of history, one must focus on the concrete, actual historical processes, concrete, actual historical actors, and their concrete, actual historical experiences. So in the preface of this text, Marx argues that he wants to demonstrate how the class struggle in France and the historical circumstances that it created basically made possible for a grotesque situation, a grotesque repetition of history, namely the figure of Napoleon. But he also wants to address the concrete class struggle and the concrete experience of the social actors that are taking place in this situation. It is a completely different historical approach. It is not deduction, it is reflection. It is not an a priori concern, it is an analysis of historical experience and historical struggle of those who are concerned by this situation. This is what I would call the discovery of the present time as opposed to the discovery of the present age. This is an experimental historical approach which wants to go deep and beneath the surface of historical phenomena, understanding the motivation of the historical actors and agencies, rather than make a top-down, a priori perspective on the possible development of human history. I guess one could make the same opposition or the same characterization between Kierkegaard's famous book entitled the criticism of the present age, published in 1846, and Nietzsche's untimely meditation on the uses and abuses of history for life, published in 1874. The same distinction. Kierkegaard is more focused on the ages. He contrasts the age of revolutions to the age of reflections, whereas Nietzsche wants to talk about the formative power force in the present that can move people, that can transform people's life. Kierkegaard talks about ages and epochs from a top-down perspective, whereas Nietzsche talks about experiences and formative forces of history. So this is where I would like to argue that there's a major distinction emerging in the mid-19th century and going through all the late 19th century, early 20th century between understanding or present time as an epoch or time or present age, which is basically a contextualization of historical determinations and usually a result of a prior deduction or passive observation, as opposed to analyzing the present time, the today, the contemporaneity, the actuality of our situation, which is precisely a situation, not a context. And situation of what? Situation of historical developments, situation of historical agency, and which is not an object of passive observation. Rather, it is a target of critical reflection, engagement, and also possibly action in politics. This is the major distinction I would like to establish. And from this vantage point, I would like to demonstrate in what comes that there are several thinkers who were emerging in the late 19th century, especially early decades of 20th century, who were precisely deeply engaged with the project of understanding the present time as opposed to the present age, and developed various philosophical problems revolving around the question of today, contemporaneity, and actuality. Well, the first important thinkers who I want to bring into the fore is Georg Simmel. Simmel is, I guess you know his work, is an extremely interesting and fascinating prolific author, both in philosophy, in history and sociology, in the end of 19th century and the first 2 decades of 21st century. I would call him, honestly, the Foucault of the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, he's absolutely fascinating. He combines a very specific and fine-tuned historical vision with an extreme sensitivity to current social phenomena, hitherto unexplored social phenomena. And I would argue that the entire project of his basically is revolves around the notion of the present time and the significance of present time. And his major aim is to penetrate into the present time as deeply as possible. A couple of examples to prove the thesis. Already in his treatise on the philosophy of history, the theory of history, he already outlined that the present has an ontological, and this I quote from Simmel, an ontological superiority, an ontological supremacy over the past and the present, insofar as it provides us an experimental engagement with time and with the notion of contemporaneity. And in his sociological treatises, in his foundations of sociology, he also argues that if you want to liberate our thinking from arbitrarily perspectives and quote sterile inquiries, we need to have some functional relationship with actuality, with what is actually going on. Now you can see this approach being materialized in many of Simmel's concrete sociological philosophical investigations. In his famous book Philosophy of Money, published in 1900, what he does basically is a detailed examination of the structures, the meaning of present-day contemporary socio-economic relationships and phenomena as an infrastructure of modern society, and I quote from him as expressing the totality of modern life. If you know this book, this is a huge meditation of contemporary modern life and the elements and structures that made modern life a totality as such, characterizing all kind of cultural, social, and subjective phenomena. If we move a little bit further in Simmel's agenda, his famous essay, "The Metropolis and the Spiritual Life or the Intellectual Life," is also a major kind of contribution to the same topic, understanding the present time. So much so that in the opening page of this essay, Simmel says that what he wants to do is inquiring about the products of the specifically modern aspects of the contemporary life with reference to their inner meaning. It's clear-cut definition of what he wants to do. And indeed, the entire notion of metropolis would be portrayed as a contemporary phenomena that readdresses the notion of intellectual life and spiritual life from a very specific spatial and geophilosophical perspective. Simmel is also famous of having been the first of addressing the notion of fashion as a social phenomenon. In his famous essay in 1906, he describes fashion, and in this very essay, he also says that the reason why he's singling out this phenomena is, I quote, because fashion always occupies a dividing line between the past and the future, and consequently conveys a stronger feeling of the present than most other phenomena. So the fashion is analyzed here because of its singularity in the present time, and because it allows us to have an access to present time in a way that no other social phenomena can do for us. And finally, another essay that I just bring here, I could enumerate the examples through this whole talk, his famous and by rightly so essay on the stranger as a new type of social type emerging modern societies, is defined in 1908 precisely. A stranger is the social type, the social figure who comes today and stays tomorrow, as opposed to the wanderer, an earlier historical social type, which comes today and leaves today. Again, it is the today which helps Simmel to elaborate basically theoretical vocabulary and historical sociological vocabulary to understand the social classes and social layers in modern society. And this is the notion of today, which helps to distinguish between various layers of social strata. I also want to emphasize in closing this chapter on Simmel that this whole kind of range of analysis and panorama of social phenomena has not remained only a kind of sociological kind of fashion in Simmel's view. It's not simply like discovering sociology or establishing sociology as a new social science that helped him to establish his vantage point on the present. This whole problematic had become metaphysical in Simmel. Simmel was a philosopher as much as a sociologist, and from very beginning to the end, he was always keen to kind of provide a philosophical foundation for his ideas. And his essay, published in 1918, called The Transcendent Characters of Life, he basically accords a metaphysical significance to the notion of presence, as one can read from the quotation and at the bottom of the slide. Let me quote: "If we retain the concept and fact of the present at all, as we are justified, indeed compelled to do so, the essential structure of life thus signifies a continual reaching out beyond itself as something in the present. The process whereby actual life reaches out into that which is not in its actuality, such that this reaching out nevertheless constitutes its actuality, this is the very essence of life itself." You could see from this quotation that the present becomes a metaphysical principle, basically reaching out beyond itself. As much as this reaching out remains within itself in the present is the metaphysical ontological definition of life for Simmel. And now you can see that this is the philosophical foundation behind all the different sociological analysis that he carried out on present social phenomena. I mean, one can just simply say that Simmel was the first major critical ontologist in the Foucaultian sense of the present time, as opposed to history, as opposed to the present age, as opposed to past things. And therefore, I think he should be, by right, be in the first of this list. But we can move further quickly and just bring into our attention two further thinkers, namely Benedetto Croce and Oswald Spengler, for whom the present time had become a very important element of historical condition and the historicity of humankind as such. I don't want to go into details at this point, only just hinting at the that the emergence of the notion of the present age as a historical and historiographical topic was a common denominator. Sorry, I can just see that my internet connection is unstable for some reason. Anyway, so I can just make a list of historians who all dealt with the present time and argued that understanding the past is a crucial thing, not only for historical interest, but also to understand the present. And Droysen, Michelet, Xenobos, Carlyle, Dilthey, and you can even extend this list back to Leopold von Ranke and others, is obviously important contribution to the problem that we're dealing with here. But Croce and Spengler moved beyond simply saying that, oh, the past is important to learn about something about the present, because they were providing some kind of ontological grounding for this idea and treating the present time as a very specific historical condition, basically the essential condition of life and modern life in very similar ways as Simmel defined life as a present focus ontological category. Croce published his book Zur Theorie und Geschichte der Historiographie in 1915, in which he argued very robustly that one needs to make a distinction between chronicle as the uninterested study of the past and history can be only defined as a contemporary issue. I quote from his book, "Contemporaneity is an intrinsic characteristic of every history, which attests the relation of history to life, like Simmel, as that of unity." And he says, "The past does not live otherwise than in the present, as the force of the present," says Croce, "resolve and transform the present." In my understanding, this is the first kind of categorical argument that the past is a force in the present. It's a topic that will go all through the 20th century. We need to understand the presence of the force field. And the force field is precisely defined by the past and the future. As you will see, this is the vocabulary that Lukács and Heidegger, young Heidegger, is using. The present is not simply a situation, it's a force field. This was also basically the major argument in Marx in the premier essay that and Croce, who studied historical materialism thoroughly and in fact published his first book on historical materialism on Marx and Engels, is very well aware of this, and he makes this a core point of his philosophy of history. The only reason we're interested in the past is because we want to do something with our present and with the forces in our present. And that's the major argument in this book of Croce, that contemporary and history is basically the same. There's no other history but contemporary history. Again, a very Foucauldian idea in its core. Now, Spengler had a very different view, but he shared the ground with Croce that he accorded the present an absolutely strategical point in understanding history. As you know, in his book, The Decline of the West, published first in 1918, then second complete edition came out in 1923, Spengler proposed and provided an insane kind of phantasmagoric kind of morphological analysis of world history, for which the present time was both a privileged cultural position and also an obstacle to overcome. I don't want to get into details of this completely ingenious, as Heidegger characterized it, an ingenious misunderstanding, an ingenious failure of Spengler's, basically try to understand the history of entire humanity and not only European humanity from a common historical point of view, and kind of arguing that it is an organic life universal becoming which is predictable and preordained, therefore can be predicted, because it's all go through the same logic of organic growth and decline. But within this argumentation, he also calls attention that the present time is a specific phase within this universal becoming for two reasons. And these reasons are the reasons for Spengler to do something which he calls the radical critique of the present. And he argues in this book that the figure of the present time as a living condition has two major characteristics. First of all, that this is a terminally or fatally Western European form of understanding history. And he argues that no other cultures have developed the notion of the present time as European did. So it is a Eurocentric. It is a Eurocentric vision. And second, it is a transitory phase because Western civilization has entered into this phase of decay and decline, and it will disappear. The notion of the present, the experience of the present time will disappear pretty soon, he says. In 50 years or 100 years, no one will remember. Well, people will remember what present time was, but no one will understand world history in terms of present time, simply because Western civilization has came to its end, and now it's entered into its decline and decadent phase. And according to the laws of world history, it's going to waste. It's going to be replaced by other civilizations. I mean, Spengler's analysis is interesting because he's the first one who basically breaks the first and the only one in this entire historical philosophical panorama back to the emergence of post-colonialism, who argues that the present time is a typically Western European form of experience, which should be criticized for this very reason and not simply accepted for this very reason. All right, let me move forward in my list and jump to the next thinker, which is close to my heart. He's a Hungarian, after the French, German, Italian. This is Georg Lukács and his Marxist project of the revolution and transformation of the present time. Now, I don't want to dwell for too long in the story of the young Lukács, although it's very interesting. The young Lukács is a philosopher precisely in the first decades of the 20th century. Is basically a philosopher who is obsessed by the modern time and the present time. He's obsessed by what he sees as the crisis of the modern culture. Basically a decay. He considers it a decay like Spengler, but he also argues that there might be a way out of this decay in Western civilization from decadence with the help of art. And he's obsessively trying to figure out a philosophy of art, a philosophy of the novel, a philosophy of an aesthetic, philosophical aesthetic that would present contemporary art and art in general as an escape from this decadent, fatal decadent phase of the Western civilization. I also want to add at this point that Lukács is very well aware of the discourse of the present of his time. First of all, he's a disciple of Simmel. He attends Simmel's seminars and befriending Simmel in 1907 and 1909 when he lives in Berlin. He writes a review of Croce's theory of historiography. And although he criticizes Croce on many points, he agrees with Croce that the present is a crucial philosophical issue of our time. And he also adopts Fichte's characterization of the modern age as the complete sinfulness. And he believes that Fichte got it right. Yes, we are in the transitory phase, and in a transitory phase where everything is falling apart, and we need to find a philosophical solution for it by reason. So, as you can see, Lukács is already not simply an author of talking about the present, he's already someone who is really kind of absorbing many of the previous reflections and analysis of the present time by various thinkers I already mentioned in this talk. Now, there is a radical change in Lukács' attitude towards the philosophical approach to the present, not in the significance of the present, when his so-called conversion to Marxism occurs in 1919. In this conversion, which, as I guess you may know, it happened like overnight, basically, Lukács adopts a radical historical vision, a radical historical ontological vision. At the same time, he keeps the present as a major issue because he argues that the present is the position, is the situation of a possible revolutionary social transformation. So he becomes an orthodox Marxist, but he takes Marxist orthodoxy in a very special way, very Hegelian way. At the same time, he develops an original philosophical ontology, which I think probably the most radical historicization of thinking and being in his time. In my view, it only can be measured by the endeavor of the young Heidegger in terms of radicality. It really goes beyond Simmel, beyond Dilthey, beyond Croce, beyond Spengler, and all the others I mentioned. Let me bomb you with a bunch of quotations that all comes from History of Class Consciousness that was published in 1923, but of which many texts was already written in the 1918, 1920, 1921. In this work, there's a radical historicization of thinking and being, and you can, as you can see from the first quotation, when Lukács argues that history, I quote, is the history of the forms that regulate all relations of man, including man's relation to himself, he says. History is the uninterrupted transformation of the forms of objectivity that shape human existence. Menschliche Dasein, he says in this very text. You know, I'm just basically paving the way for Heidegger, although the two men certainly known each other at this point, but were not collaborating at all. No, other than radicalizing history to the extreme, Lukács also argues that there's a vantage point in this so-called becoming that we call history, and the vantage point in the present time. And he says, again, quotation, historical materialism enables us to view the present historically and hence scientifically, and to penetrate beneath the surface and perceive the profounder of historical forces which in reality control events. Let me remind you of the Foucaultian quotation I started this talk with. The excavation beneath or feet, Lukács says almost literally the same thing. Penetrate beneath the surface and understand the present. This is something which philosophers should do. He also uses the vocabulary of historical forces that has been used by Croce. He also uses the notion of becoming as used by Spengler. All I'm saying is all this because I just want you to make sensitive to this intricate intellectual context that was mesmerizing so many thinkers at the same time, using same type of argument and the same time using same type of arguments for very different philosophical projects. Simmel, Spengler, and Lukács, they're definitely not in the same camp, as you will see with Heidegger, who is also opening up a new path in this. Lukács also argues, like many people before him, that all historical knowledge is self-knowledge. The past only becomes transparent when the present can practice self-criticism in an appropriate manner. As you will see, this quotation appears at the very same time in Heidegger, almost literally, as my next slide will demonstrate it. And let me quote the last one from the famous essay on the reification and the class conscious, on the essay entitled Reification and the Class Consciousness of the Proletariat, very famous essay, very historical radical critique of contemporary society, and also a major meditation, the notion of the present, where Lukács argues that man must be able to comprehend the present as a becoming. He can do this by seeing it in the tendency out of whose dialectical opposition he can make the future. Only when he does this will the present be a process of becoming that belongs to him. Only he who is willing and whose mission is to create the future can see the present in its concrete truth. I brought this quotation here because it's basically literally the Heideggerian project as exposed in his existential ontology and as is basically portrayed in Being and Time. Again, I repeat, the two men probably met. They were both students of Rickert at the same time doing their habilitation, but they had no philosophical relationship as far as we know it whatsoever. Lucien Goldman argued that Heidegger read and been influenced by the history of class consciousness. There's no literary trace of this. But one thing is sure, the two philosophers argues basically literally for the same understanding of the present as something which opens up the future and illuminates the past, and also it's a becoming, and using this argument for two radically different philosophical project, a Marxist, proletarian, informed, revolutionary political project in Lukács, and an existential kind of anti-modernist, conservative, phenomenological philosophy project that will have its kind of flirting, if not more, with Nazism a couple of decades later. At the same time, the focusing of the present is a very common point for the two philosophers. Let me just prove this immediately by focusing on Heidegger. In the very year when the History of Class Consciousness has been published and the Decline of the West had been published, in 1923, Heidegger gave two university courses at the University of Marburg. The first one entitled Ontology and the Hermeneutics of Facticity. The second is Introduction to Phenomenological Research. These two lecture courses were held after, a couple of months after the History of Class Consciousness has appeared. But these are the first philosophical expositions of Heidegger's existential ontology, the one that going to grow into the project of the being and time. But these are also the texts and universal lecture courses, which are major critical meditations on the question of the present time, on the question of the today, and the question of contemporaneity. Heidegger argues in the first lecture course, he starts the entire lecture course saying that every philosophy of the philosophy its own time, quoting basically Hegel, and therefore we cannot start a philosophical interpretation which does not confront itself with the problem of the today. What does it mean today? What does it mean to be today? What does it mean to exist in the today? This is the opening basic research of Heidegger phenomenological analysis, and he goes into detail the various understanding of what does it mean today and the present time. And he does the phenomenological maneuver, very characteristic of his approach, saying that if we want to understand what today means, we need to trace this phenomenon back to the facticity of subjectivity of ourselves who exist in the today, of ourselves who lives in the today, and who experienced the today by means of its own temporality. This is the notion of temporality, Zeitlichkeit, that came into the fore through the Heidegger argumentation. Also, notion of Eweiligkeit, kind of translated in English, a whileness, like the momentary being here in the now, in the today, the other crucial Heideggerian term. And Heidegger also argues that the reason why we don't understand this today is because we fatally misunderstand the temporality of the subjectivity and the temporal subjectivity that projects the understanding of the today. He goes into details of this misunderstanding, and interestingly enough, he says there are two major intellectual currents that basically obscure the notion of today. Today, he says, the one of them is Spengler, the other is the use of Hegelian dialectic. You know, I don't know if he's really after Lukács in this lecture course, but he definitely says one of the major issues why we cannot understand temporality and or see present situation in time is because we use dialectic obsessively. And dialectic, Heidegger argues, and I quote from his, is something radically unphilosophical and lacks philosophical meaning because it adopts a philosophical categorization without any kind of critical attitude. Basically, Heidegger argues that dialectic as such is trapped into a traditional ontological categorization. Therefore, it's unphilosophical. Therefore, it's not radical enough. I love the way when in this lecture course, Heidegger says in one passage that, you know, you take one year of reading Hegel, and then you can talk about everything. And it will seem that you have some meaning to say, and people will believe you. But believe me, this is a false image. This is a complete philosophical misunderstanding. It's a huge and very funny critiques of Hegel in this lecture courses. Check it out if you're interested. But he also criticizing Spengler, saying that Spengler is a genius misunderstanding, is a fantastic failure because he saw something, but he saw something in the radicality of the present time, but he completely misunderstood it and basically balloon, a huge intellectual balloon, which is good for nothing and means nothing. Anyway, other than criticizing intellectual trends for obscuring the today and the present time, obviously Heidegger launches his own project. And it's called the phenomenological understanding of the today through subjectivity, through Dasein. And it's also called the destruction, phenomenological destruction of the past and the present. And here again, here are the quotations that I wanted to bring here to compare it with, to compare notes with Lukács, if you want. Just check them out. I quote, "It is only by way of a radical historical critic that any philosophical research can get to the bottom of things at all, that is, to the depth of present and the past. History is something that we ourselves are." Compared with Lukács' notion that every historical knowledge of self-knowledge, the critic should be exercised to understand the present. He goes further, "The critic of the historical is nothing other than the critic of the present." Exactly. Lukács, a critic such that through it, the situation of the interpretation itself becomes transparent and critical tilted. It's an existential ontology. It's not Marxism, Leninism. It's not dialectical materialism, but still, the motives and the philosophical argumentation, the stakes are really the same. At one point, Heidegger goes beyond, and that's what I want to flesh out in the last quotation, and he argues that the only way we can have historical objectivity is if we look history from the critical vantage point of the present. So he argues that if we don't do that, we will be falling into arbitrary understandings like Spengler or like dialectical thinking. That real objectivity is precisely bringing back history to the subjective of the present time. Just read the quotation from the lecture course, Introduction to Phenomenological Research. He says, "The objectivity of the phenomenological destruction is such that the past is brought to its genuine being. That is, to its suitability to redound, Rückstoß, on the present itself. Only if the past is brought to the possibility of redounding, do its objectivity and the way the present is bound up with history emerge." So basically, Heidegger says that, look, if you don't understand your present time critically, ontologically, existentially, then you deprive yourself of having any kind of objectivity of the past. In this way, he goes a little bit further than I think than Lukács, but they all share the same viewpoints that this whole phenomenological and critical understanding will open up the future. For Lukács, is going to be the future of the communist revolution. For Heidegger, as the being and time exposes it in detail, is going to be an existential project of understanding yourself from the future, and therefore being able to come into terms with your own past, and therefore appropriating your own present authentically in the experience of the moment, Augenblick, and become who you are. This is the project of the being and time, which receives its historical philosophical grounding in these lecture courses, and will be transformed into an existential analytical project, a full-fledged phenomenological existential analytical project in the being and time. Now, I don't want to go into the being and time, although it contains some fantastic passages about the present, about the moment, and about the fact that, according to Heidegger, people have to gain faith through the present, and that's the authentic historicity of the people, of a nation. So that's when a vocabulary is emerging in Heidegger, which will be suitable with the Nazi movement. That is clear. What we know by now from the Schwarze Heft, other Heidegger's writing, it's clear that there is some deep affinity with the vocabulary of the being and time concerning the present and the historical fate and the Nazi movement. Heidegger basically considered the Nazi movement as a revolutionary movement that can help to provide the basic instincts and basic political kind of force to realize what he has written about in Being and Time. All right, conclusion, and which means a couple of questions. I'm really inviting you to jump in addressing all these issues here and the previous ones, obviously. So it seems to me that the present time is, as opposed to the present age, is a genuine historical philosophical novelty of the second half of the 19th century, early 20th century, one which had emerged in one of the most intense phases of the late modern European development. You know, I could open a new lecture here and talk about the major social, cultural, technological transformations that provide, according to the sense of the present, the sense to the present time, an exceptional weight in the late 19th century, early 20th century, including the First World War, including the Russian Revolution, which obviously created the image of a time of unprecedented change. To quote something from my friend Zoltán Simon, it was also an age that interpreted itself as an age of unprecedented change. And this is what triggered the sensitive toward the present. But it's also created a long-lasting tradition. I mean, I would argue that, you know, Lukács opened up a tradition of critically confronting the present in a Marxist tradition. Ernst Bloch, Gramsci, Walter Benjamin, Adorno, Marcuse, the entire Frankfurt School, Frederick Jameson, Alain Badiou, Slavoj Žižek, you name it. The entire tradition of confronting the present from a Marxist dialectical point of view was basically coming out of the history of class consciousness and its obsessive philosophical focusing on the present. But I also can argue that Heidegger opened up an entire existential phenomenological confrontation with the present that reappeared in Sartre, reappeared in Husserl already, in the Crisis of Husserl, reappeared in Merleau-Ponty, reappeared in Ricoeur, reappeared in Michel Henry, and again, the whole phenomenological tradition in Patočka, Jan Patočka, and the question of political phenomenology focusing on the crisis of the present is a new philosophical genre that was born at this very moment. Which is interesting from a purely philosophical point of view, and that's my second point, is that the present time is being invented or introduced and defined as a specific philosophical dimension that allows the communication between the metaphysical ontological theses and the normative theses. As you can see, every philosophy of present that I mentioned is a normative philosophy. It's a critic. It's a selection. It's a provocation and promotion of certain social values as opposed to other values. There are classes here. There are people. There are distinctions between various people and various layers of society. There are distinctions between various values of culture, which are being demarcated in the name of the present. What is progressive? What is regressive? What should be kept? What should be abandoned? It is a normative philosophy. Every philosophy of present is normative philosophy, grounded on some basic metaphysical ontological views of history, of life, of human becoming. So the present is invented as the interface between the metaphysical and the ethical and the political. And I think this is the major novelty of this whole philosophical agenda I was talking about. The historical present as an interface, as a point of transmission between metaphysical ideas and ethical political ideas, between the theoretical and the practical. Now, if you want to boil down what we've received as a legacy from this absolute intensive tumultuous period of discovering the historical present as a philosophical problem, I think it boils down to a couple of major points that are still with us today, that still motivates us to think about the present, still motivates all the thinkers, as mentioned at the beginning of my talk about the present. At the same time, they can also be viewed, and that's my conclusion, as an obstacle, because they may not fit to the time of unprecedented change we are living right now in the today. I think there are four things that constitute a legacy from this tradition that I kind of sketched out the major pillars for us for our discussion. The one is the present is being understood as a situation of crisis, and the phase or the possibility of social cultural criticism emerges. The present is a crisis. This is a major topic of all of these discourses I mentioned, from Simmel to Spengler to Lukács and Heidegger. And we kind of get used to understand the present as a crisis. We can only have an access to the present if we understand it as a crisis. And this is an obsession. We have no idea of the present time if it's not a crisis. We're not sensitive to the present if it's not a crisis. This is a legacy from this period. It's also the emergence of the modern notion of social criticism. So we also inherited social criticism of the present from this time as a possible way of intervening to the present time, defined as crisis. The second issue is that the present is almost always viewed as a dimension of social cultural values, of intangible social cultural values. Interestingly enough, the material conditions of the present is never an issue, not even for a historical materialist like Lukács, not even for an organic philosopher like Spengler, meaning that the present time is never defined through nature, through body, through embodiment, through physical environment, through materiality. The present is something spiritual, fundamentally spiritual. The forces that animate the present, being cultural, social forces, are always spiritual kinds. Materiality, physicality, nature, and embodiment does not play a fundamental role in the ways within which we define the present. And I think it remained like that up to date, and it's a major obstacle. At this point, I could open maybe a little chapter. I will not just hint. Bergson was the only philosopher who at least tried to play with the idea in his Matière et Mémoire, in the Créatrice Evolution Créatrice, the matter of memory and creative evolution, that the materiality has something to do with our understand the present. But even he turned into, in his later philosophy, to an absolutely idealist, virtual understanding of the present as a spiritual kind of configuration. Third prejudice, third fundamental condition and legacy we receive from this tradition is that it always argues, almost uncritically, for the synchronicity of the individual and social experiences. The present is defined as a synchronic unity. The culture is synchronic. Decadence is synchronic. Critical escape is synchronic. Class concession is synchronic. Authentic existence is synchronic. Every idea of the presence is based on the idea that synchronicity is the key to understand or common experience in the present time. Diachronic understanding, discordant temporality, it's not a part of the vocabulary of this tradition, and very traditionally, all along the 20th century, usually the present is understood as a synchronic issue, and I think it's also a very interesting philosophical development, one that may be an obstacle if we want to understand our present time. And finally, all of these approaches to the present, maybe with the only exception of the very conservative Oswald Spengler, is an overwhelmingly Eurocentric, portrays an overwhelmingly Eurocentric worldview. The present happening in Europe and nowhere else. The present is a geophilosophical concept, an uncritical geophilosophical concept, because it does not address anything else but Europe, European history, European intellectual traditions, European modern life, European decadence, European crisis, and European solutions. This is again something which I guess maybe the element which is the most outmoded of all the discursive elements that I highlighted in this talk, the Eurocentric worldview and the Eurocentric approach to the notion of the present. My final conclusion is basically a question, and this question is obviously, feel free to answer it. What can we make of this legacy that I kind of portrayed here, and how should we eventually transform it? If we want to philosophically address the polycrisis-ridden and polychronic challenges of what we experience today in the form of the so-called unprecedented changes. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry if the internet connection has been kind of unstable from time to time. I hope you could capture the sense of what I was arguing for.
Yes, great. Thank you very much, Adam. Much appreciated. Now it's discussion session. Somebody already posed 2 questions in the chat. Well, I guess if nobody else, I mean, everybody else can think about, maybe we take the first question from the chat. I will read out for everybody. Um, if we think in terms of the inseparability of the study of history from the present tense, can it be said that the historical subjects or phenomena studied are all equally true or false? Maybe you make what you wish of that. Madam? Okay. Not sure where he is.
There was a lapsus, I guess.
Yeah. Did you catch the question?
I catch the first question. I don't know. Did you read out the second one too?
No, I only read the first one. Maybe we
Yeah.
take that first, and then we take some other audience question first.
Well, I guess, the whole point is that it's precisely not. I mean, whereas the present time appears as the ultimate vantage point for understanding historical processes, I argue that it's also a normative stage. It is precisely the stage where metaphysical assumptions, historical ideas, and social normative claims are overlapping. The present has been invented to deal with all these issues at the same time. And I would argue that every historical conception of the present is an ideologically infused idea. They all has very clear normative claims about what is the major feature of the present, what counts as progressive and regressive, where are the boundaries of this present, who are the proper agents of this present, who are the subjects who belongs to this present. I mean, even Fichte in his lectures back in those days, he already clearly demarcated between people who can understand the present and between people who cannot understand the present. There's a social division in every notion of the present. In Lukács is the proletariat versus the bourgeois class. In Heidegger is the authentic Dasein versus the inauthentic Dasein, the people of the everyday, those who just gossip, those who just, the publicity. In Simmel, there are social divisions from every characterization of the present, through the fashion, through the stranger, through the city dwellers, and these are all imbued with normative claims. So precisely, the present is the philosophical stake where philosophers gradually learn to allow themselves to make harshly normative claims about society and social actors. And I think this is the whole point, which allows them to be critical, at the same time to allows them to be ethical and political in their philosophical considerations.
Okay, thanks. Great. Thank you very much. Just to add, the question was by Dennis Aidener, I think something like that. Just I forgot that before. And the second question. But first, we have two more questions. First is Knife, Albeit, and then Chris, and then we can come back if there's nothing else to question too. But Knife,
Sure.
please, next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Well, first off, it's not a question, just a point. I wanted to mention Jean Gebser, who I mean, with the thinkers you mentioned earlier on from Spengler and the rest, I think maybe could be seen as a paradigm, as part of all of them, as part of a paradigm when discussing the present as a philosophical problem. And I think Jean Gebser maybe could be seen as an individual of that specific paradigm, but maybe even somewhat situated between Heidegger and Spengler, because he spoke of consciousness and he defined it at least as it should be seen as neither knowledge nor being conscious per se in the modern sense, but rather it should be understood for the time being in the broadest sense as a wakeful presence. So he kind of viewed both synonymously, the consciousness and the presence. So I think it's an interesting thinker, hence the title of his book, The Ever-Present Origin. So I think he's an interesting thinker to look at when considering this specific question. Now, my question maybe would be concerning Spengler, and it's a good thing you mentioned that unlike the rest in terms of Eurocentrism, he was a big critic of the Eurocentrist approach to history, which I kind of, I mean, anyone can notice when reading Spengler, surprisingly. And One thing I wanted to mention, and I think you're aware of this, and you probably mentioned it briefly, is his unique sense of using the word contemporary. And of course, it cannot be understood, his unique sense of the word contemporary, unless you understand his concept of homology and analogy, his morphological philosophy of history and philosophy of culture. So essentially, we are contemporary to Rome prior to the emergence of Caesars. I think this is well known about Spengler. And Kant and Goethe could be seen as contemporaries of Plato and Aristotle in Greco-Roman culture, and these are contemporaries of Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina and Arabian and Magian culture, for instance. So and the same thing it does for architecture and art. So for me specifically, being diving deep into Spengler, I think one thing is that people tend to, there's many different ways, as Greg Soar said, of reading Spengler, many different ways. You have many different approaches. There's a positivist reading of Spengler, purely positivist one. There is a relativist reading of Spengler. There's somewhere in between, which he specifically designed, you could say. The Adorno read him in a specific manner. I see him specifically as a thinker, including Jean Gebser as well, as thinkers that could maybe allow us to, including Heidegger as well, despite his critique of Spengler, as thinkers that could actually provide us more. I don't think we should overcome them per se, but rather use their ideas to develop our understanding of the present. So just wanted to see your ideas on these. So it's not necessarily a question per se, just specific ideas I wanted to mention. And thank you for the talk, brother. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, thank you for this really fascinating remark. I mean, I couldn't agree more to your comments on Spengler. I think he's a fascinating, annoying, inspiring, and author. And I mean, I can't free myself for Heidegger's judgment when he says this is a truly ingenious failure. When he says there's so many mistakes, at the same time, the gaze that Spengler possesses is penetrating, and one of the most, Heidegger says, one of the most authentic diagnostic gaze, again, Foucault, diagnostic gaze in our present that we have. And I fully agree with you that his notion of contemporary, of which I not talk, I should have, and thanks for reminding me, is something unprecedented. As you mentioned, he argues that the notion of contemporary should be completely understood in a different way. It's a trans-temporal and a trans-cultural notion. So as you said, in the declining phase of the Western civilization, we are not contemporaries with the people's civilizations, nature around us. Our contemporaries is the declining Rome or the declining Hellenistic tradition. Alexander the Great is contemporary of Napoleon, and it's a fascinating idea. I think he mainly argues in a trans-temporal way. So the contemporaneous should be a category comparing respective cultures being in the same phase of progress or decay. But I think there's a chance that one can use this vision to make it a truly transcultural understanding of contemporaneity, meaning that we do not have one present, especially not a European-centered present. The present is not a temporal phase in the line of history, it's a location. The present is transversal, it's discordant, it's multiple, and it's multiply happening in a different ways simultaneously in various geopolitical areas. I think this is something which we could positively acquire from Spengler, because otherwise his notion of organic development of human history, I think it would be very difficult to understand it as not a completely obsolete, outdated version of historical progress. Like saying that we can predetermine history simply because we know the logic of growth and decay, which is similar to man, trees, and animals. It's a hopelessly kind of pre-Darwinian vision, which I don't think can help us out to understand present time, historical time, contemporary in any manner. So, but this is the fascinating of Spengler. There are completely messed up elements in his thinking, intermingled with radically new insights. And again, I couldn't agree more with you that we definitely need to keep rereading him, because he was, in a way, he was completely out of his time. He was the non-contemporary of the contemporaries. He was the one who was, he was was a weird way of understanding his old time. And I think we need such figures to practice ourselves into this intellectual habit of being the weirdos of our own time. I think that's the way to address many of topical issues that we're facing today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Next is Chris Lawrence.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Adam, for your very rich panorama that you sketched. And given the breadth of the thinkers you have been dealing with, my question or my remark is perhaps a bit ungrateful, because I wanted to ask you why Hegel is not figuring more prominently in your lineage of thinkers, because well, there is a clear line between Hegel, Croce, Lukács, the Frankfurter School, etc. I mean, actually, Lukács has characterized what he was doing in Geschichte und Klassenbewusstsein as Überhegeln von Hegel. And also with Adorno and Horkheimer, they are pretty conscious that they're working in this Hegelian tradition, in which the notion of totality is a very central notion. And I think this is actually also, well, connecting these Hegelian thinkers also to Bloch, of course, who also needs to be put in this perspective. And maybe, I mean, these Hegelian roots of all these thinkers can explain why the crisis of the present is analyzed in terms of social and cultural values. Because I mean, that's I think there's some relationship between let's say the Hegelian or the role that Hegel is fleshing out for ideas, the very notion of ID. I mean, values are basically transformations of ideas, and ideas that gain material power, one could say. So that would be actually my first question, whether you would agree with me on this Hegelian lineage of this whole tradition. A second question, and that's my last question, is whether you would agree with me that Max Weber should not be included in this lineage. I mean, his influence also on Simmel and I mean his role on practically all discussions around the turn of the 20th century it can hardly be overlooked. And also, I mean, he has also been absorbing Nietzschean ideas. I mean, which are foundational for let's say the more right-wing thinkers that you have been dealing with. So, well, I will keep it to that because we're.
Well, thank you for the great questions, and thank you for posing them. Now, as far as Hegel is concerned, I could answer jokingly by saying that I did not include Hegel in my talk because I knew he was going to come on my way anyway. So yes, of course, Hegel is the major figure in this story, but Hegel is also an object of struggle for many thinkers. So first of all, you know, I think he's pretty much in between in terms of dealing with the historical present as an age or as a situation at the time. Hegel do both, and he do both without clearly reflecting on this, precisely because the very terms of this problematic emerged after Hegel, due to Hegel, but after Hegel. So in his history of philosophy and even his phenomenology, he's completely switching from understanding his present time as an age into understanding his present moment as a situation. And he uses one for the other. You act in the present time, but you do in order to create a present age. And when you create a present age, you do this in order to understand better your present time. Obviously, dialectical mediation plays a huge role here, but it also obscures a little bit of the sharpness and the true meaning of what Hegel wants to say. No, I think this is a reason why, although almost all the thinkers, maybe except Heidegger, has used Hegel or the Hegelian intuitions in their respective approaches to the present time, they used Hegel selectively. They used different Hegels. Hegel was as much as an obstacle as an inspiration for all of them. And it was a way that the notions of present was a way of going beyond Hegel himself. It's very clear in Croce, for example, when he basically says that, oh, if you want, his famous essay, What is Dead and What is Living in Hegel's Philosophy, is already meditation of the contemporary use of Hegel. And he argues that if you want to save Hegel, you need to focus on his objective spirit and objective philosophy, not only subjective spirit. And this is his choice that, oh, the present is an objective stage as far as it's contemporary, it's filled with contemporary concerns. Lukács do the same thing. Obviously, he wants to melt Marx with Hegel, but he also incorporates Fichte in the pictures and argues that Fichte in many ways went beyond Hegel in his history of philosophy because he did not consider the present time as the final stage of historical development. Therefore, Fichte was the radical thinker who kept the future open, and therefore one could use Fichte in Marxist terms to understand the future, and the future as the major condition to understand better the present. At the same time, Hegel was coming back on the window all the time because, yet again, Lukács argued against Moses Hess and others who used Fichte that no, you can't do it. Fichte is an undialectical thinker. Therefore, you need to use both Fichte, future vision, and Hegel dialectic to get to the bottom of the Marxist idealist, so the Marxist strategy of understanding your present in terms of opening up a revolutionary future. So all I'm saying is that there was not one Hegel. There was as many Hegel as philosophers trying to use Hegel. And I think this is the Hegel legacy. I mean, Heidegger is right that, in his criticism, basically that, yeah, you can use it for everything. But this is also the kind of discouraging moment in the Hegelian dialectic that more you use it, less you mean it. So obviously, Hegel is a major issue here in Frankfurt School and Marcuse and obviously the whole Marxist tradition. At the same time, I'm also interested in those approaches of the present which wants to do away with Hegel and wants to avoid him while defining the same temporal categories and philosophical states that Hegel was dealing with. So this is my kind of take on this. Now, as far as Weber, and obviously, I did not talk about the social sciences and the social sciences imbued with philosophical consideration at the time. The sociological tradition that just emerged, not only in Weber, but also in Tönnies. Tönnies was a major figure, even more influential at the time than Max Weber was. Also Durkheim in France and his school. There's a lot of very interesting discourses and often philosophically interesting discourses about the present time and how to analyze the present. And Weber was obviously particularly influential in his talks, in his lectures on the vocation of the contemporary vocation of philosophy and the vocation of politics as kind of providing a diagnosis of the present time from an intellectual point of view, and quoting Hegel and, for that matter, Lukács too, as a possible option to kind of situating ourselves as intellectual in the present time. So these are obviously major thinkers I should have included, except I didn't want to deal with the social sciences at this point, because one could also include the emerging anthropology to this point. In Malinowski, in Boas, you will find the definition of anthropology as a science which deals with the present. It's a science which deals with the evolution of society as they can be observed in the present time. And obviously, the whole cultural anthropology and ethnography could be included here. just as much as psychology and sociopsychology, which has been again invented within this same area. So I think that this leads me to add the new elements for the list I concluded with, namely that the present time was also an interface between philosophy and the emerging social sciences. It's an interface, it's a place of competition between the two, because there was huge competitions between philosophy and the social sciences. It was ongoing debate between sociologists and philosophers on the time, like who is entitled to deal with the social question or the question of cultural life. Or there was a huge debate about psychology. So
There's no sound here.
Yes, Adam, you dropped out again. I hope you will be soon back again, as before. Well,
I hope I did not silence him.
well, probably. Well, if not him, then his internet connection.
Yeah.
I should hope we can wait a bit, I guess. Okay, he now dropped out totally. I should hope if everybody waits, we can wait a minute or so. If he doesn't come back, we have to maybe, unfortunately, close. But yes, let's see. Yes, there is. Adam is back. Yes.
I lost it. You know, I'm
no.
just having difficulties to bring in the present time, I can see.
Yes, we're happy you're back. If you do
Yeah.
want to finish what you said, or should we go to the next question?
Yeah. So Weber is major milestone in this project. Thank you for reminding me.
Okay,
And
great.
Hegel.
Now we have Piotr raised his hand, but I would also have a question, and I have. Do you mind, Piotr, if I go right now, because mine relates a bit to what they were discussing, and then we have still one more question.
Yes.
Yeah, then we have one more question from the chat. I also have two questions, maybe one and a half, maybe relatedly. Not sure. You tell me. So thank you very much. First, you mentioned a lot of thinkers that we usually don't hear in this seminar, so it's much appreciated. I think it's fair to say, though, that most of the thinkers you were discussing, they are philosophers. They're not historians mainly. I mean, there might be an argument to be made that Foucault is a very unconventional historian on one level, but the rest are basically philosophers. And the project they are after is what you call sort of an ontology of the present, right? Or like the problem of the present time, which I think you showed very well comes out of an understanding of crisis that only came up with the epochal events or the epochal changes that came up with the 19th century from Marx to maybe now our present. So my first question is sort of maybe even meta-philosophically, what kind of methods do those philosophers have that are not historiographic by which they come to their analysis of the present? It can't be sort of a deduction from a principle, otherwise we're back to Fichte and much earlier stuff that you cannot do nowadays anymore. But what would be the methods by which they accomplish it? I mean, some of them have certain values, some of them are social theories like Marxist with doubtful empirical grounding, perhaps. But is there any sort of specifically philosophical method by which they would accomplish that, which is not transcendental deduction or something like that, which would back to the beginning in a sense? And the other question is sort of what is the relationship? If I think about it from the other way around, with which I usually think from history or historiography, I mean, the historians come around and always say we understand the present via the past. Okay, that's what we as historians can accomplish. Fair enough. And historians also have come around to say that we can understand we should understand the present and the past via the present. They've come around to this too. I mean, some call it presentism or whatever, but it's accepted as long as you do it well. You don't commit certain errors like anachronism and such. But what is, I think, impossible for historians is to write the history of the present. Because to write the history of the present, you need to be in the future already. And that you cannot do unless you have some kind of speculative philosophy of history behind yourself. So maybe then the ontology of the present must be something different from the history of the present, right? At least in the historian's understanding. Ontology of the present, you might be able to write if you have a certain social ontology that applies to all present, or you have some other deduction of an ontology, social ontology, perhaps. So is it correct to say that there's a certain basic contradiction between the projects you were presenting here to us and what historians try to accomplish, or is this too strongly put? That would be my question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Thank you. I mean, both of it was, but about the methodology, it is true. it seems to me that all these different authors I mentioned, and probably we could, if we keep kind of adding new names to the list, it would the same claim would confirm itself, namely that every philosopher has invented their own way of addressing the question of the present and their own methodology to analyze the present. So, and they all claim that these are genuinely philosophical methods. There's a keen kind of tendency, almost all of these philosophers, to try to separate what they say from precisely from historians and social scientists. This is the deduction of Fichte, as you mentioned. This is the morphological analysis in Spengler. This is the kind of socio-philosophical analysis in Fichte, which thinks in terms of life and not simply social phenomena. This is the dialectical method of Lukács. This is the phenomenological distraction in Heidegger, and I think we could go further. They all claim that there's a special philosophical access to the present, and there's only one. And obviously they're all different at the same time, very different. So I think it just proves that this proves that for them the present is not it's a genuine philosophical object. It's a proper philosophical category, and the invention of this category is the major achievement of late 19th century, early 20th century, because they focus all of their philosophical energy, their methodological aspirations, to define the present and try to prove that only if you use this method will you understand yourself as existing in the present time. So yes, so for me it just proves that this is not something they were doing in passing, or this is kind of applied philosophy, or this is the practical side of my thinking. This is ethics in a way. This means just there was a metaphysical, methodological focus on the present time, and the way they invented various methodologies and argued for the exclusive use of it, it proves their point, prove that this is a genuine and a philosophical object of high importance. Now, as far as the historians' and philosophers' vision is concerned, this is very interesting. I hinted at the talk that this is running parallel. The historians kind of come more and more to terms since Ranke. Ranke is already arguing in his lecture course in the 1840s that we want to learn history not simply to know better the past, but also to understand the present and to influence the politics of the present. This is something which Droysen basically takes literally out from him and from Hegel, and emphasizes even more. And there is this the present basically is the significance of the present in the historical research is growing exponentially. At the same time, there's also a growing concern among historians, as far as I know, that no matter how deeply we engage with the present, we do not want to become philosophers. So the separation between philosophy and history and is a growing distinction, and the focusing on the present is a growing common point. And different historical schools reacting differently to this situation. I mean, in the French tradition, there are schools that kind of adopt a philosophical point of view, and the school of Langlois and Yobos, for example, they say, yeah, there is something philosophical in every history. The school of Annal, they reject philosophical approaches, although they are one of the major promoters of the notion of the present, and the history of the present, as you mentioned, is an invention of the Annal school. And they kind of reject any kind of philosophical approach and claim to have been able to develop their own kind of methodological, quantitative, social historical approaches to the present time. So I think it varies from school to school and period to period. But it's true that those figures who want to kind of mix the historical approach to the present with a philosophical approach, like this was Foucault's example, they are the one who causes the most of the scandal. They are the one who being attacked from both sides. Oh, you're not a philosopher, you're a historian. Oh, you're not a historian, you're a philosopher. And we do have some such figures. In France, Foucault, other than Foucault, Michel de Certeau, who had the same reputation of being accused by historians and philosophers of mixing genres and mixing discourses. Zimmel has a little bit of same status in terms of sociology of history and philosophy. So I think it's a very interesting kind of stream within this problematic that I talked about, to kind of figure out the relationship between historiography and philosophy. They coming and going and arguing, and they are allies and enemies at the same time. And it's part of my project to kind of unravel these threads as much as possible. So thank you for making this idea, for highlighting this idea in terms of this talk.
Thank you very much, Adam. Now we have Piotr, and then we still have the question in the chat, but we also, in 20 minutes, we should come to a close at latest. We are approaching 2 hours, which is great. But please, Piotr, next.
Yes, thank you, Adam. It was an excellent talk, and I was just, to a point, like going back to Hegel, I think, in a way, because there's a big gap in the panorama. I think, like if you start from Fichte, but then somehow as I understood it, then the main figures would be, or the time that you point out as the crucial would be the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, where this is happening, right? So the time of your other protagonists. And then I was thinking, what happens in between, right? So between Hegel and those philosophers starting from the late 19th century, right? So the second half of the 19th century. And I thought, like, to some extent, maybe this focus on the present would be, as Gadamer has it to some extent, a reaction to a development in historical sciences. So in a way, it became important, like temporality, present, past, they became just more tangible concepts in this time, and they were not before, to some extent, and that posed a reaction from many different thinkers. And then when I was thinking about it, I wanted to just ask you, is this temporality, could you see it as sort of a romantic notion that is against this kind of universality and goes back to the interest in temporal issues, and present being the central but not the unique of them? So would it be like this philosophical present as a part of temporality as a crucial philosophical concept against the whole strain of philosophy understood not in a cultural way, not in a temporal way, not in a practical way, but sort of in a logical way? And then you would have sort of the follow-up to this, that there's this division not only between the West and the rest, but between the continental and sort of analytical or logical philosophy that would downplay the ideas of temporality to some extent. And now we're going back to evaporation of this division, I think. So do you consider that, and do you consider this sort of how is all of what you said is the difference between the present age, how is it distinguishable from just a modernism or Neuzeit? There would be like this more historical or social categories, not the philosophical ones, but certainly they've been developed at a similar time. So yes, that's my comments and questions. I know we're running short on time, but yes, thank you very much for the talk.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're absolutely right to point out that this context is much more complex than I suppose, or in line with what I presented here. And I would be by no means kind of would want to claim that I have a full picture of all the authors and all these different currents and intellectual movements in history, social science, and philosophy concerning the present and the present time. You know, more I dig deep into this, more windows and more realms of opening up. It's an infinitely rich field in terms of, especially if you look at to the field of arts or literature, or maybe second line thinkers in philosophy, in sociology, in anthropology, in various fields of philosophy. It's absolutely fantastic, and I kind of invite you guys to take a look. It's a fantastic realm of discourse. Now, as far as the timing is concerned and the different motives that led to this emergence of the philosophical invention of the present time, I would argue that it was Marx, and I also mentioned at the beginning of my talk, it was Marx Brumaire who was a major breakthrough point in this, and he's clearly between Fichte and Hegel and the end of the 19th century. I think the growing social sensitivity to social issues, and the social issues are always issues of the present time, had contributed to the emergence of the awareness of the present even more than dealing with the philosophical problems of temporality, I would argue. In the Marxist traditions following Marx and Engels, there's a bunch of thinkers like Lassalle, like Moses Hess, even the early Bernstein and others, who were dealing already with the present, problems of the present from a philosophical Marxist point of view. And I think it came before. So the social question, the impact of the social question, it came before the deep philosophical engagement with the problems of so-called temporality. Temporality was also obviously a major issue, and I would refer here to Bergson, who I already mentioned in passing, and other thinkers around him, but also in the Anglo-Saxon tradition. I would argue MacTaggart and his idea of the unreality of the time was a major mediation to understand ourselves, not only metaphysically about time, but also what type of experiences we are having when we talk about time. So even in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, I could relate this, and not to mention that in the Vienna Circle of Thinkers, there was quite a few thinkers who kind of published diagnostic philosophical treatises about their own time. Moritz Schlick has a book about his own time, and Carnap, Carnap had essays diagnosing and analyzing the philosophy of his own time. So I think this concern, Bertrand Russell wrote even in his early text, even not simply metaphysical essays, but all the political and ethical essays, which were clearly a way of philosophy dealing with the issues of the present time. So I would argue that this was a lot of things kind of melted and intermingled at the same time. One of them is the social issue. Second is the discourse of the time, as you rightly pointed out, and all this led to this growing sensitivity toward the present time. But I think the major issue is still, who are those philosophers who try to conceptualize accurately what was at stake here? Who was those philosophers who tried to give a conceptual framework to our notion of present and include time, society, history, metaphysics, science in there? And I think if you do that, you're going to end up almost surely with the list that I present in this talk. You had these major thinkers who basically were inventing this genre and giving it further as a legacy for late 20th century thinkers. And basically, the present had become a common object for many philosophers who are, like Foucault, maybe not fully aware of the intellectual tradition he is continuing, or not want to acknowledge those sources like Heidegger and Lukács, who were major kind of milestones in the development of this problematic.
Right, thank you very much. People are slowly dropping out already, but there's one. I think we could end it shortly by the second question, just to be fair, that Dennis Idena had. And the question is, I read it. Do you think it possible to construct a chain of historiographical traditions and a new chronology of writing by analyzing the methods and habits of those who study the past, or maybe those who study the present, perhaps? I'm not sure, Pastor. So do you think we could make a different, yeah, you take it as you wish, and,
you know,
and you've got the last word.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, this is the great, thank you very much for this whole entire session and talk, and I'm very happy to be able to kind of attempt to answer to this last question, because the question in my last slide was not a rhetorical one, namely that what can we do with this legacy when it comes to confront ourselves with our own present? I deeply believe that we need a some change of perspective, vocabulary, analytic approach, methodology to understand what is going on in our present time, because there are certain premises that we cannot hold valid anymore. Eurocentrism, not to take into consideration the natural the present of the nature, environment, and material circumstances. And the digital revolution also poses new questions about the present time, which of the analysis of which obviously is not included into the models that we inherited from the late 19th century, early 20th century. So yes, I think we are in the very urge and need to try to redefine philosophically our notion of present, and working out this may help us to confront many of those issues that we are fatally dealing with at the moment, from climate crisis to technological and political issues. I do this project in order to have that opportunity. So thanks for this question, and thank you very much for this entire session and to be able to talk about my problems and my possible approaches to them. Thank you.
Right, then. Thank you very much, Adam. Thank you very much, everyone. We are here at the end at nearly 2 hours. That's great. As I said before, we'll all see you again, hopefully in 2 weeks' time, when we have the next talk in our new research series, PHO2. Thank you very much. Bye bye.